So I just wanted to make sure it's part of State's Exhibit BB, composite, it'll be, yes, BB8. Judge, this is the exhibit passed to the court. You had asked us to redact the chest portion, which we were able to do. I think Mr. Shea was under the impression that you thought we were going to redact out like the skull stuff too.
The medical examiner's internal photographs of his autopsy, because they were so forwarded, and I don't see any purpose in
I ordered that the chest cavity would be redacted. That's what I ordered. Not the actual evidence in this case, which is the headshot. I mean, with the scalp exposed, and so I think this comports with my ruling.
Yes, sir.
Okay? So, is there any other questions?
No, sir, that's all we wanted to just address that time.
All right, so we're ready for the jury?
Yes, sir.
Go get the jury. I think it's getting colder in here.
It is freezing.
Is there any way you can call anybody about the temperature in the courtroom? It's just very, very, very cold. Okay. This is just ridiculously cold. I want to go get something that measures the temperature. I'm just curious.
What would you get? I mean, a thermometer, but I didn't know if you.
It's a clock. Clock has a thermometer in it.
Does that thermometer not work? The thermostat and play the temperature?
It's like a panic button in an airplane. It doesn't do it.
That's clever. Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
It's 65 degrees here.
Maybe that's the.
Yeah, but
It said 70 earlier, so I wonder if it's
no,
the temperature going
72
down.
is the thermostat setting. The temperature inside is 45 and 65 degrees. So it's not working.
I'll call and see for something.
I think they need a phone number for the doctor to call.
I'll let Mr. Anderson's assistant work that out. All they need from us is the jail. I mean, is that order?
She called me and said, go to the courthouse, but I'm not for doctor to call. She apparently was calling me a number.
Jury. Sorry, turn the witness camera on.
You ready? Jury's present, seated. You may be seated. State, call your next witness.
Good, witness camera on.
Yes, Judge. The state would call Dr. James Fulcher.
Come forward.
Raise your right hand, this one, please.
solemnly swear affirm that the testimony you shall give in this cause will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help me God?
Yes.
Thank
This
you.
way, sir. Just watch your feet.
Sir.
Thank you.
Are you going to use the street?
Yes, sir.
I'm gonna I can't see anything. So I was going around.
Do you want
No,
to?
no, go ahead.
Bring a chair in?
Funny.
Oh, my wife did see that. You may proceed.
Thank you, Judge. Good afternoon, sir.
Hello,
Can you please introduce yourself to the jury and spell your last name?
I'm Dr. James William Fulcher, Fulcher.
Where do you work, sir?
I'm the Chief Medical Examiner of Volusia County.
Now, what does the chief medical examiner do?
I do autopsies, I examine decedents, determine a cause and manner of death, and on some of those cases I testify. I'm also in charge and responsible for all death investigation in the county. I have 15 employees that help me do that.
Can you tell us a little bit about your background and training to become a medical examiner at first and then the chief medical examiner?
Sure. I'm originally from Virginia. I went to college at the University of Virginia. I then went to medical school at the Medical College of Virginia. I then did a residency in anatomic and clinical pathology. I then did a fellowship in forensic pathology, and I served as the Chief Deputy Medical Examiner of Greenville County, South Carolina for 10 years, and I've been your chief for the past 3.
So there was a lot there. Let's unwrap it a little bit. First off, in order to be a medical examiner, do you have to have a medical license?
Yes, I'm licensed to practice medicine in the state of Florida.
Are you also licensed in Virginia, I assume?
South Carolina, my Virginia license I inactivated, and my North Carolina license is inactive right now.
Let me ask you about your fellowship in forensic pathology.
Sure.
Can you tell us what forensic pathology is and how is that relevant to you as the medical examiner?
Sure. Forensic pathology is a specialized branch of pathology where you're trained to examine bodies, do autopsies, and determine cause and manner of death.
What is just pathology to begin with?
So pathology is the study of human disease.
Okay. So you have just your specialty is basically in conducting autopsies, basically.
Yeah, my specialty is my specialty is pathology, and my subspecialty is forensic pathology.
Tell us a little bit about how many autopsies you've conducted in your 13 or 14, 15-year career.
It's approaching 4,000 now.
As the medical examiner here in our circuit, do you conduct an autopsy on everybody who dies, or is there just special circumstances you do?
No, Florida Code 406 determines our jurisdiction. We only take jurisdiction if it's an unnatural, unknown cause of death, a suicide, an accident, a homicide. If you have terminal cancer, we would not autopsy you, something like that.
Have you ever testified in court before as an expert in forensic pathology and as for the cause and manner of death?
Yes, sir, I have.
About how many times has that been, sir?
It's slightly over 100 now.
And has that been both in South Carolina and here?
Yes, sir.
As a chief medical examiner, have you had to previously review autopsies performed by other medical examiners to render an expert opinion in court?
Yes, I have.
Were you asked to review 3 different autopsy reports that were performed on individuals by the name of Laquetta Gunther, Julie Green, and Iwana Patton?
Yes.
And who actually performed those autopsies originally?
Dr. Parsons?
And is Dr. Parsons, has he passed away?
Dr. Parsons is dead, yes.
Prior to today, did you have an opportunity to review the autopsy files and the photographs for the 3 mentioned ladies?
Yes.
Tell us exactly, in order to prepare to testify and give your opinion, what did you review in reference to that for them?
Sure. So I have the entirety of my case file from my office. It includes all paperwork from the case, body diagrams, The pictures are located digitally. I reviewed those. X-rays, if they were taken, are digitally in our system, so those are reviewed as well. My opinions are based on review of the report, but also the autopsy photographs, which are very illustrative in these cases.
Is there also notes and diagrams that Dr. Parsons would have drawn that you referred to?
Yes, those are our body diagrams. They are part of the standard autopsy protocol.
Would he have taken measurements of certain injuries that you'd also rely on?
Yes, sir. Injuries and measurements are always recorded.
Do you also get toxicology reports or review the toxicology reports in those cases?
Yes, in all these cases, we'll draw specimens for toxicology and send them to an outside lab, and then we will interpret the results ourselves.
So as part of your expertise, you have some expertise in toxicology?
Yes, sir. That's part of the fellowship for 1 year.
Do you mind telling the folks what toxicology is?
Sure. Toxicology is the testing of specimens from the human body. Oftentimes they're blood, but they can be other fluids as well, for toxins and or foreign substances.
Did these sources that you relied on contain objective facts and data that a reasonable medical examiner would rely on to support his or her opinion concerning the circumstances, the cause, and the manner of death for Ms. Gunther, Ms. Green, and Ms. Patton?
Yes.
And from these sources, were you able to reach your own conclusion concerning the cause and manner of death, as well as the certain circumstances of their death of Ms. Gunther, Ms. Green, and Ms. Patton?
Yes.
And then following your review of the materials associated with the autopsies of Ms. Gunther, Ms. Green, and Ms. Patton, did you reach a conclusion for them?
Yes.
And is that within a reasonable degree of medical certainty, sir?
Yes.
Okay. So first let's talk, now that we got past that, let's talk about how is an autopsy done and what is an autopsy, and if you could explain to the folks how, you approach, in general, how one is done, sir.
Sure. A forensic autopsy starts with an examination of the outside of the body. Injuries will be documented. Things like eye color, hair color, piercings, tattoos, scars, all that data is recorded. We then examine the internal portion of the body. We remove organs, we examine organs, we look at tissues under the microscope to best ascertain a cause and manner of death.
And when you say you do your external examination, if there's what might be a stab wound or a gunshot wound, you're looking for those on the external and the internal examination?
Yes, so we will identify the wounds, be it an entry wound or an exit wound from a gunshot or a stab wound. We'll document it on the outside of the body, but then once we get inside the body, we'll document what areas and what organs of the internal body are damaged by that wound.
Is it that combination of the external and internal examination that leads you to be able to make a conclusion about what is the cause and manner of death?
Yes, they're both integral in that process.
Let's talk about Miss Gunther, LaQuinta Gunther. I know you, there might be an additional last name you may have had on that.
Yes, Campbell.
Campbell. But we'll refer to her as Miss Gunther, is that okay?
Yes.
Okay. Once somebody is, dies or it's an unusual circumstance, how does your office come into custody or control of that body?
Sure. Law enforcement will call my investigator. I have a staff of investigators that provide 24/7 coverage for the county. They will go to the scene, take photographs of the body as it is at the scene. We'll package the body in a body bag, just a standard plastic body bag. It will have a metal seal with a number, and that seal will be recorded at the scene. It's then put in the transport van, and then we put it in our cooler. Generally, the next morning, we come out, and the first thing we do is take a picture of that seal to make sure it hasn't been tampered with.
And when someone, suspicious death that comes under your jurisdiction, your office is responsible for the body, until your medical examiner or investigator arrives there, the officers really aren't allowed to touch or manipulate the body?
Correct. Our evidence at the scene is the body. Everything else is the police, law enforcement, but the body is ours.
When you say a cooler, do you mean like a refrigerator or a...
It's a very large refrigerator, yes.
Okay. What was the number given to Miss Gunther? And if you could just describe how that number arrives.
Sure. Her ME number is 05-0915V. V stands for Volusia. That means she is the 915th case that was done that year. And the 5 is the district, obviously. Or sorry, the year. Sorry, the year.
When was the autopsy conducted on Miss Gunther?
The date of the exam was December 27th, 2005.
How much did she weigh and how tall was she?
I will refer to the report. She was 64 1/2 inches tall and 136 pounds at autopsy.
How old was she when she died, sir?
45.
What was her, was she black, white?
I have to remind myself. She is an adult white female.
And I know we're fast forwarding, and then we'll come back and be very detailed. But can you tell the jury first we'll start with, what does the manner of death mean when you refer to a manner of death?
So the manner of death is one of multiple jurisdictions. They're integral with the cause of death. It can be homicide, suicide, accident, pending, which means we're just waiting for more information, undetermined, or natural. In my world, homicide is someone dying by the action or inaction by another individual. That's our medical definition.
As a part of that, the cause of death, what is the cause of death?
The cause of death is the injury or disease process that is the proximate or immediate cause of death. Without that injury, that person would not have died at that time.
In the case of Miss Gunther, what did you determine was the cause of death and the manner of death, sir?
The cause of death in this case is a gunshot wound to the head. The manner of death is homicide.
Judge, may I have the witness step down, sir?
You may.
You could bring the little pointer too. From that with you.
Ah.
Just going to turn this a little bit more up, down, if you don't mind. Thank you. So if you could just show, well, let me do this first, I'm sorry. Can I approach the witness, Judge, again?
You may.
I'm going to show you what's marked as states BB. If you could take a moment, look at all those just to yourself. I'll hold this for you.
Very good.
Are those a fair and accurate depiction of the photographs that were taken of Miss Gunther's autopsy?
They are.
Will those assist you in being able to explain the injuries and some of the processes you had to go through for the autopsy?
Yes.
Judge, at this time, anything seem to be altered or changed about them?
No.
Judge, at this time, the statement movement states BB.
Only my original objection, no objection to these.
All right, subject to my previous rulings, the items will be admitted as evidence. Madam Clerk.
Case number 28.
So I'm showing you what's marked as 28A.
Yes.
Could you explain what that is so the jury knows? I know you described it previously.
Sure.
In a photograph.
This is the tag with the zeros, 807, Volusia County Medical Examiner. This shows, there's two zippers obviously, this is sealed, and this is the placard with the year and the autopsy number. These numbers will appear in most of the photos you'll see. They should appear in all, but some of these they may have cut out based on their editing. But this number will always appear in a photo we take.
Before we move on to the next photograph, Miss Gunther, did some of her, was she having any decomposition during the autopsy, especially in her head area?
Yes, so bodies in Florida, not surprisingly, decompose relatively quickly. There is some early decompositional change. You will see a distinct green discoloration of the skin and also some slight insect activity, in particular fly eggs.
Was there a reason why her head would decompose maybe before the rest of her body?
Yes, the insects are attracted to the blood if they're injured.
So where her injury was on her head?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
So that area will preferentially decompose quicker.
Yes, sir. So I'm going to show you what's now 28B. Can you point out, and we won't want to spend too long, can you point out where the injury is to her head and describe if that's an entrance or exit wound, if you could, sir?
Sure. This on her is the exit. It's ragged and irregular, everything else. This is all decompositional change. The epidermis is slipping from the dermis. The green discoloration is called marbling. It's a standard part of the decompositional process.
Okay. And now I'm showing you 28C. Can you orient us and tell us what that's a photograph illustrating?
Sure. This is the back of the head. The scalp has been shaved. This is a very nice semicircular entrance wound.
How can you tell the members of the jury, in how your profession, your expertise, you could tell that's the entrance as opposed to the other wound from the front of the head?
Sure. So entrances are generally clean, punched out. So if you take the edges of this and push them back together, the skin puckers. You can't get it to put cleanly together. On that wound on the front, that could be put together quite nicely, and it would be reapproximated. Let me refresh my memory here. I don't believe we opined on, we did not opine on any thermal injury here. This is just some decompositional change. This does not imply there's soot or stipple or any gunpowder residues on this surface.
And we'll talk about those later, but if you had seen those, what you just talked about, why would that be important as a forensic pathologist?
So it would be important because it would allow us to determine with more precision range of fire. That is how close the muzzle of the weapon is to the skin as the weapon is discharged.
In this case, based on your review of all the photographs, all of the records, do you have an opinion about what the range of this gunshot would have been, sir?
Yes, so there's no soot, there's no stipple. I would say with a handgun, this is 6 inches to a foot, maybe a little bit beyond that. This is not a contact wound. There's no searing, there's no soot. Another, you'll see this in one of the other, another very characteristic thing we have with a contact wound on the skull is you'll have this round effect, but because the gases from the barrel tunnel between your skull and your scalp, it actually makes a little bubble and it pops, and you'll have a little stellate tear on the edges. And that stellate or star-shaped tearing is very characteristic of a contact wound. We do not have that here, so this is a little further away. And I should say, our range of fire estimations, they're not exact. I couldn't tell you 2 inches versus 5 inches. It's just a range.
Yes, sir. Let's go back here. The internal examination of this gunshot, what was the path of travel of the projectile or bullet?
So I'll refresh my memory here. This enters the posterior head, creating extensive skull fractures at the base of the skull, which radiate to the calvarium, which would be the upper portions of the skull. And most of the wounding here occurs in the brain tissue, and I believe it's lower down on the brain. Let's see here. The hemisphere is undefined path. So we know from where the entrance is and the exit, the brain's in between. The pathologist, and I would agree with this, because the brain was significantly decomposed, they could not elaborate on exactly what parts of the brain were damaged because they were so damaged by decompositional change. So the overlying decompositional change prevents an exact look at the brain. We know it's there based on where the holes are, obviously. But we cannot look at it in great detail because it's softened and decomposed.
So, in your, expert opinion though, the path of travel of that bullet, what would it have done to actually kill Miss Gunther?
Sure. So, because we're low down on the base of the skull with an entrance slightly higher, we're going to be really damaging midline structures of the brain. Brainstem, cerebellum, basal ganglia. All that stuff at the base of the brain, the bottom of the brain, is what keeps you alive. Without that, you're absolutely dead. So based on the wound path, very severe injuries should have occurred to vital centers in the base of the brain, brainstem, basically everything down below the upper portion of the cortex should have been damaged. As far as the upper portions of the brain, based on how it came through midline, those probably weren't that relevant to the cause of death. The wounding that's critical is at the base of the brain.
Doctor, could I ask you if you can use the pointer and maybe on me illustrate what the direction of the bullet would have been, sir?
Like this. Forehead, back of hairline, that looks better. Right through there.
Okay. So an upward angle?
Yes.
Does that mean that the individual was shot in an upward manner, or could that have been dependent upon her positioning?
Exactly.
Okay.
So, only thing I can tell you is that the bullet travels from here to here upwards if the body is in a standard anatomic position. That does not mean that she wasn't like this or like that, so I can't tell you in the three-dimensional space of the scene how her head was. I can't do that. I can just tell you between here and here.
What was the measurement or size of this hole from the bullet, from the entrance wound?
This is a 0.08 centimeter defect, which is a little, it's about half an inch, a little less than half an inch, ballpark.
Based on your experience, your knowledge, what kind of caliber bullet would have caused this wound, if you can, sir?
So, based on just this appearance, I would favor a medium caliber handgun round. However, the internal injuries to the skull and then the exit corroborate that. I can tell you it's not small caliber and it's not like a high velocity rifle round.
So would a .40 caliber bullet be compatible with this sort of injury?
Yes.
When you said some of the injuries to the skull help you make that determination, could you maybe just
Sure.
drill it down for us a little bit, but explain
Sure.
like what you saw there that
So-
caused that?
While there are significant fractures to this person's skull, were at a 22, they lose so much of that kinetic energy when they penetrate the skull, they rarely exit. They can. Oftentimes they'll ride the inside edge of the skull. If it's something like a shotgun or a high-powered rifle, we wouldn't even have the front of the head. It would be significant. The kinetic energy difference is several times more with a rifle versus a handgun. So this is way more characteristic with a medium caliber handgun than something like a rifle, centerfire rifle, or a rimfire 22 that just doesn't work for that.
And the injuries to the skull would be consistent with your...
Yes, the injuries to the skull corroborate that. We would have an exit wound that was significantly larger than that if this was a rifle round. If this were a shotgun round, we would have, be it a slug or shot, we'd have a much, much, much larger entrance as well.
And now in 28D, I'm showing you, we're looking at, I guess that's the right hand, is that correct?
Yeah.
Can you tell the jurors, was there any injuries to the right hand, and if you can point out what it was?
Sure. This is the injury. It's between the web of the middle and index finger. Interestingly, it doesn't affect bone. The bullet just passes cleanly through this soft tissue here. It hits no vital areas, and there is no soot deposition or debris to indicate a closeness or proximity to the barrel, nor is there any evidence here based on how minimal the amount of tissue is as to the direction. So I cannot tell if it goes this way or this way, just that it passes through this area of the hand. These are the fly eggs I was warning you about. And this is washerwoman hand sign, which basically means she was in a moist place and the skin's wrinkling up just like it would if you sat in the bathtub too long.
And this is the, this is 28E?
That's the other part of that wound.
Okay.
Once again, I cannot give an opinion as to which direction it goes.
Would this, in 28D, Doc, and 28E, is a hand wound like that, would you, in your profession, consider that possibly a defensive wound?
It certainly could be, yes, absolutely.
Can you explain to the jury what that means and why you would opine that possibly?
So a defensive wound, you often see with knives, but it's when someone tries to, they sense something's coming, be it a knife or a gun, and they put a hand up in front. We see people stab through the hand trying to catch the blade or grab the blade or put their hand on the gun as it goes off. It's a defensive injury. It implies that person was trying to prevent the weapon from hurting them.
And let's move on to 28F. I guess this is a closer up of the entrance wound.
Yes.
That shows a clear, I think you explained it already, but that's a good illustration of what it looks like.
Yes, slightly ovoid, which actually makes sense for the trajectory. If the bullet enters straight in, it punches a nice circle, but if it comes at an angle, it makes a little more of an oval. So it actually works quite well for that directionality that we know exists in the head. There's a slight abrasion collar. Once again, that does not imply, that's just the skin being torn as the bullet passes in. That is not meant to imply there's soot or any sort of thermal injury there.
And now we're at 28G. This is, can you describe what this is and what this
Sure.
illustrates?
The brain's been removed. We're looking at the inside of the skull. We are looking at the base of the skull. This hole's not supposed to be here. That's the hole the bullet made. This is the foramen magnum, where your spinal cord goes through. This is how your spinal cord gets to your brain. This is called the posterior fossa, the back portion of the base of the skull. The middle fossa, your ear canals live here. Your eyes would be up here. You can imagine that if we have a hole in the forehead, lots of really important things are going to be wounded in this wound path based on where this enters. One more thing I need to point out is the beveling. So because the skull is made of an inner and an outer table and is rounded, when a bullet enters your skull, the hole it leaves on the inside is bigger. So if you look, I'm going to draw carefully. This is the hole it makes in the bone coming in. But when it leaves the actual bone, it makes a bigger hole. So it's beveled outward. Does that make sense, I hope? So it's beveled outward. The exact opposite applies when it exits.
Can I get every counsel sidewalk, any witness with this?
Okay, now, Doc, we're going to go to 28H. Can you explain to the jurors what this is and what that's showing, sir?
Sure. This is the exit wound. We have fracturing. The wound's actually up here, but portions of the calvarium, the frontal bone in this case, are fractured and removed. The fact that this portion of the frontal bone is pushed outward with beveling, you can see now we're outward beveling. A person can see that. This is the exit from this decedent's head.
And let me just hide that for 1 sec. All right, and are you okay, comfortable if we move on to Ms. Green? Do you have the report there if we go there?
I should grab it, but yes,
Okay.
I'm
Yes,
happy
sir.
to do that. Okay.
May I approach the witness, Judge?
You may.
Sir, I'm going to approach and show you what's marked as states CC for identification purposes. If you can take a moment and just look at that, sir. You're good. Thank you. Are those fair and accurate depiction of the photographs from the autopsy of Ms. Green?
Yes.
Anything seen to be changed or altered?
No, sir.
And Judge, at this time, the state would move in states CC.
Any objection? No objection, Your Honor. Subject to our previous discussions, the item will be admitted as evidence.
And may I publish that with Dr. Fulcher, Judge?
You may do so.
I think it's 29.
Thank you. Can we back up real fast?
Yes.
To Ms. Gunther.
Yes.
You may, I don't think you'll need, I just wanted to talk to you about the swabbing. Are you aware if there was a sexual assault kit done?
There was, yes, sir.
Okay, and can you describe to the jurors how you, as a medical examiner, do a sexual assault kit? What you're
Sure.
doing?
Sexual assault kits have been standard for several years now. Essentially, you get a packaged kit from your state crime lab, which contains various swabs, drying racks, envelopes. Essentially, what I am doing is looking in body cavities while I'm doing the autopsy for injuries, the mouth, the vagina, the anus. And while I do that, while I'm visualizing those body cavities, I will take a cotton-tipped swab and swab the entire circumference, trying to hit every area of that orifice to collect potential DNA. I then put it in the labeled drying rack, which is labeled for that decedent and for that body area. It dries, I put it in another envelope, I seal it, and I sign it, and put it back in the box with the crime.
Thank you.
No problem.
And was that done in Ms. Gunther's case?
Yes.
And Ms. Gunther's toxicology, if you don't mind going back to that.
I'm sorry. Refresh my memory there. My apologies.
No, that's my fault.
Yes. I have the toxicology report.
And for Ms. Gunther, was she positive for cocaine?
Yes, she is positive for cocaine.
Okay. And that's my only question about the toxicology. If we can move over to Ms. Green's autopsy.
Yes.
I assume Ms. Green's body was collected the same way as Ms. Gunther, from your team picking it up, or whoever you contracted to pick it up at the murder location or the location of the body, was placed in refrigeration?
Yes, so I should say, my investigators will go to all homicides. I use no contracted labor to collect these bodies. It is my personnel, my investigators.
What was the case number that it was assigned to Ms. Green?
I'm reading from her report, 06-0042V.
And I'm showing you what is in evidence as 29A.
Yes.
For right here is the case number that you guys utilized?
Yep,
Okay. And is this a photograph of Ms. Green?
yes.
Can you describe the cause and a manner of death for Ms. Green before we get into the specific injuries?
Her cause of death is a gunshot wound to the head. Her manner of death is homicide.
Looking at this photograph, are you able to tell if the injury to her, above her eye is a exit or entry wound?
This is an exit.
Can you describe to the jurors again how you know that, sir?
Sure. You can actually see the beveling, or sorry, a person can see the beveling here. A person can also see these stellate lacerations, and it could be reapproximated here, and it could be put back together where you wouldn't have puckering in this particular case. So in that particular case, this represents an exit.
And then if I can show you what's in 29B, can you describe what this is a photograph of and tell us how you know, sir?
This is the left occipital scalp, right here. Here we have a contact gunshot wound to the head. This is thermal injury and abrasion from the muzzle of the barrel. And this is that stellate laceration I was telling you about from the gas tunneling under the skin and causing that laceration.
When you say a contact wound, can you illustrate for me exactly what you mean for the jury?
For a medical examiner, a contact wound means that the barrel of the weapon is against the skin surface. In this particular case, it's probably fairly tight to the skin surface to create this abrasion.
And you said earlier, a lot of that is because of the gases from the gun, the heat from within inside the gun?
Yes. The gases, as you fire the charge, the projectile, the gunpowder burns, and as it changes from a solid state to a gaseous state, those gases are what push the bullet out of the barrel. Those gases tunnel into the skin surface and create this artifactual laceration.
And the gases just come out of the barrel with the bullet?
Yes, they are what is pushing it through the barrel.
What was the size of this bullet wound, sir?
Refresh my memory. It is a 0.8 centimeter, which is right around that half-inch mark.
Is that pretty close or around the same size as Ms. Gunther's wound?
Yes.
Based on your, and we'll come back to that in a minute, but I didn't ask you her biographical information. What was her her height and weight, sir?
This person was 62.5 inches in height and 95 pounds.
Was Miss Green, was she white, black, Hispanic?
She's white.
Tell us what sort of injuries were caused by this bullet path of travel, sir.
Sure. Because this body is not as decomposed, the pathologist is able to give a more detailed analysis of the wound tract. This projectile damages the left cerebrum, cerebellum, with extensive skull fractures and disruption of the eye, the globe of the left eye. You could see, one could see that the exit wound was above the left eye.
What does that mean for lay folks? What the cerebellum?
Sure,
and,
sure.
When you hit that, what is that? Why does that kill somebody?
Sure. So once again, vital areas of the brain stem, cerebellum, the structures at the base of the brain that are critical for providing respiration, regulation of heartbeat, are damaged in this wound path. The wound path is similar to the other one, slightly more lateral, but still fatal.
Can you illustrate on me what the wound path is on that one, if you could, sir?
Very similar. It is going to be slightly more lateral. The other was more on midline. We're a little further to the left here, but otherwise very similar.
Based on the injuries or damage to the skull inside, are you able to also tell what kind of medium caliber or small caliber sort of projectile it was?
Yes, for the same suggestions I made on the previous case with fracture patterns and damage to the brain, this should also be a medium caliber center fire handgun round, not a high velocity rifle round, not a shotgun, not a 22 or rimfire.
So when you say 22, that's usually a lower caliber
Yes.
weapon?
22 is a .22 long rifle. They also have 22 magnums, but those have significantly higher muzzle velocity. 22 long rifle is a rimfire cartridge, which has low kinetic energy.
Well, the size of this, the 0.8 centimeters, is it?
Mhm.
I think- Is that consistent with what the size of a 40 or a medium caliber projectile would be?
Yes.
Is this wound consistent with what could be a form of 40 caliber weapon?
Yes.
Now, we go back here, so if we can, 29A, we go back. So the bullet came through and then it exited here.
Yes.
Did you find a bullet, since there's an exit wound, I would assume the answer is no, but did you find a projectile or a bullet inside of Miss Green?
No, no projectiles were recovered.
And if we can go back to Miss Gunther, was there a projectile located in her?
No, with an exit, no projectiles were recovered.
Okay. And now we're looking at 29C, which is, I guess, the front view again, sir.
Yes.
Based on the way that the bullet comes out, does that also help you determine sort of kind of the caliber bullet or what it tells you a little bit?
Yes. Based on this stellate laceration, the exit, one would expect that this is a medium caliber center fire handgun round. This ecchymosis is simply, or contusion, bruise, here is from the blood tracking down. This does not imply that there is an impact or injury here. This is artifactual from the blood dripping into that area from the fracture that is underlying this.
And if we could talk about the toxicology for Miss Green, sir,
Yes.
if you don't mind.
Okay.
Just give me one moment. Was she positive for cocaine?
Yes, sir.
And let's move on to Ms. Patton. If we're okay. Just let me know when you're ready. Maybe I'll pull some stuff out.
Okay.
So, was Miss Patton received the same way as Miss Gunther, Miss Green, in the sealed body bag by y'all?
Yes.
What date was Miss Patton? What date was her autopsy conducted?
February 24th, 2006.
Was she assigned a special number? I mean,
Yes.
not a special number, but an identification number from the medical examiner's office?
Yes, sir.
What was that, sir?
06-0148V.
What was her weight and her height, if you don't mind?
Her height was 63 inches and her weight was 143 pounds.
How old was she at the time of her death?
35.
And was she white, black, Hispanic?
She's black.
Mayor Pro Tem Witness,
You may.
sir, I'm going to show you what's been marked as DD for identification purposes. If you could flip through that, see if you recognize those, sir. those fair and accurate photographs of taken during the autopsy of Miss Patton?
Yes?
Anything seem to be changed or altered about those, sir?
No, sir.
Would those assist you in being able to explain the injuries to the jury?
Yes, sir.
Judge, at this time, the state would move in state's DD.
No objection.
Without objection, will be admitted as evidence.
State's number 30.
I'm going to show you now it's 30A, Dr. Fulcher. Once again, we have our unique 06148 number.
Yes.
What was your determination of, or the cause and manner of death of Miss Patton?
The cause of death in this case is gunshot wound of the head. The manner of death is homicide.
Now, this one is a little bit more, can you point out where the injury is on her head and then tell us whether or not that is an entrance or exit wound, sir?
Yes. The entrance wound is on the right nasal ala, the right aspect of the nose. One can see this is rounded. One could not reapproximate the edges without puckering. Therefore, this is an entrance wound.
So Miss Patton was shot in the front of the head through the nose. Would that be a late
Yes,
statement? Okay.
that's correct.
What was the path of travel of this bullet through her head?
Interestingly, in this case, because the wounding is at the nose, the base of the skull's above that, on the frontal lobes. So in the front portion of the skull, we actually have wounding to mostly nasal structures, the sinuses, but it does eventually pass into the posterior fossa, the back of the skull, damaging the cervical vertebrae at the level of C1 and causing a contusion to the cerebellum at that point. So in this case, the wounding is really to nasal sinuses in the front, and then in the back it gets into vital structures.
When you say contusion,
A bruise.
A bruise, okay.
A bruise, a brain bruise.
Unlike Miss Green before and Miss Gunther, well, possibly Miss Gunther, was their death pretty quick, the two of them?
Yes, the first two cases have much more severe injuries to vital structures. Death would have been nearly instant to within seconds.
What's the difference with Miss Patton? Would she have been alive a little longer and she'd be possibly conscious a little longer?
She would have. We have damage to vascular structures near C1. We have a contusion to spinal cord and cerebellum, but not a bullet completely damaging it, perforating it. So presumably her survival window would have been a little longer, a minute or so, maybe a few minutes, but not instant like the other two.
And is it plausible that Miss Patton could have been conscious for several seconds after being shot?
It is possible to be conscious for a few seconds, yes.
Once again, looking at the entrance wound here in the nose, are you able to, or is it measured? Do you know what the size of that was, sir?
I do.
Thank you.
It is 0.5 centimeters, so 1/2 of a centimeter. No, I'm sorry, that was the abrasion collar. It's 1 centimeter, sorry, 1.0 centimeters with the abrasion collar measuring 0.8.
And is that, I'm sorry, Doc, was that close to the size of the .8 ones previously you
It's
talked
been
about?
2 millimeters.
Looking at the internal injuries, describe some of the internal injuries. You already did in the back of the brain, but would there be other injuries that you can look at that might help you also understand the kinetic energy of the bullet here?
Sure. We have the bullet perforating the nasal sinuses, the oral pharynx, and it enters the calvarium just medial to the foramen magnum, the hole I showed you earlier. it enters there and basically enters and immediately exits. So it does technically enter the skull, but only for a brief moment. While it's there, though, it's next to vital structures, brainstem, cerebellum. So it creates significant wounding despite only being in the skull inside the skull for just a half an inch or less, just in and out, almost like a guttered wound straight through. When I say guttered,
Almost like a.
guttered wound, like a gutter, like that catches rain on your roof, it's a name for a wound that it comes in and it goes and exits and makes one continuous long wound, and the entrance and the exit are part of that, a gutter, like something that catches rain.
Based on the internal injuries and based on the 1 centimeter size, can you give us an idea of the caliber, what kind of caliber bullet it could have been, medium, small, large again?
This wound, based on the fracture pattern, the wounding to the spinal column, is most consistent with a medium caliber centerfire handgun round.
Would that be also based on the size of the entrance wound too?
Yes, the size of the entrance wound isn't an exact science, but it certainly excludes .22 and rifle, based on everything we have.
So just so the jury's clear, in Ms. Gunther's case, this, your opinion, is that this is not an injury from a .22?
That is correct.
So can you describe, this is the close-up, I guess, of the entrance wound?
Yes. This is the nose, the nostril, the lip, the defect with the abrasion collar. One is looking at the, actually the mucosal covered cartilage of the interior of the nose, your sinuses basically, at this point. These are sinuses. Sinus tissue, I should say.
And this is 30C. Can you describe this injury right here and maybe explain why it's like it's like a line? Sort of.
One can see this is the posterior neck on the left side. As I said before, the injury is to the left side. Maybe I didn't say. The injury is to the left side of the spinal column. That's consistent with this. This is a linear or slit-like exit. You could reapproximate these edges and suture them, and it should not gap. So this is consistent with a slit-like exit on the back of the neck, left-sided back of neck.
Dr. Fulcher, since this one is from the front as opposed to the back, could you illustrate on me what the direction of travel of the bullet would be?
Sure.
Thanks.
Touch your nose.
All right.
So it's going to be left, right, so right-sided ala, which is going to be, you got it? Everyone watching?
There's folks right, let's turn this way because there's some folks behind you. Can't see.
Oh, sorry. Right here. You don't have a ton of vertical deviation. It enters on that side of the nose and comes straight out, but it does cross midline, of course, because it exits on the left. So we cross midline, and that vital wounding, once again, at the level of the cerebellum brainstem.
And once again, I don't know if I asked you, but this is consistent with the 40 caliber, could be consistent with the 40 caliber projectile?
Yes, I would not anticipate a .22 perforating all the bone or the sinuses, base of skull, and exiting. That would be unlikely.
Was there a sexual assault kit taken of Ms. Patton?
Yes, sir.
Just as before, they swabbed the oral, the vaginal, and the anal
Yes,
cavities?
sir. Those are the three orifices that are routinely swabbed in a sexual assault case.
Was there a projectile found in Ms. Patton?
No, because there is an exit, no projectiles were covered in this case.
Can we fast forward or turn to her toxicology, sir?
Yes. I have it.
1 second to get there too. And was she positive for opioids?
She was positive for hydrocodone.
Thank you, sir. Can I just have a moment, Judge?
Yes.
And I don't think I asked what Miss Julie Green's age was, sir. I might have, but I can't recall, if you don't mind. Thank you, Doc.
No.
Ms. Green is 35 years of age at the time of examination.
Thank you. And I can have you sit back down. Thank you, Doctor.
You're welcome.
Thank you. I don't have any other questions, sir.
Thank you.
Any present memory, Doctor?
Hello, sir.
I have some questions on clarification a little bit, if I may.
Yes, sir.
I believe it's your testimony that you performed hundreds of autopsies, is that correct?
Thousands, yes, sir.
Thousands. Can you give any estimate of, in that number, how many would have been found to be under the influence of some form of a drug like cocaine, hydrocodone, or a mixture of those?
Judge, I'm going to object this to relevance to our case.
You can answer it. I'll overrule the objection.
A lot of them, sir. I should say a vast majority, easily half are overdoses or people that are intoxicated. Probably more like 60 to 70%.
And going to the sensory perception, what happens to the brain as far as the sensory perception when someone is under the heavy or under the influence of cocaine, hydrocodone, and other types of drugs?
When someone is under the influence of cocaine, hydrocodone, alcohol, they will have an altered sensorium, an altered sense of reality, some slowing of respiration, various other systemic things occur in the body, slowing of heartbeat, sometimes not with cocaine. With the opiates you would. With the stimulant drug like cocaine, you might find agitation, delirium, excitement, sometimes even hallucinations, nonsensical behavior.
I'm more concerned with the sensory effect on the brain. Would
Sure.
that weaken the sense of pain, as an example?
It could, yes, sir. Particularly the opiate.
Now, you gave the age, the weight, and height of these three ladies.
Yes, sir.
Let's take Miss Gunther, for example. You indicated she weighed 136 pounds. She was 6'4" inches, and she was age 45.
Yes.
For a person age 45, is that an unusual amount of weight or height?
No, sir.
Would that make her stand out individually in a common crowd as an individual that you would identify as being unusual?
I don't think so, no, sir. That BMI is well within standard deviations of being a normal weight.
And that would be true of also Miss Green. You indicated she was height 6.5 inches tall, 95 pounds, And I don't have her age, if you recall what
She
age.
is 35.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Is that unusual height or weight for a person 35 years of age that would make her stand out in some unique fashion?
She is fairly skinny. However, I'll tell you medically, her body mass index is 17, so she's not technically underweight, actually. She's very, very close to it, but not quite.
And if you will, if you'll look back to Ms. Patton, I have the same question for
Yes.
her, for her weight, her height and age, if that's an unusual statistic for someone her age.
She is 35 years old. She is 63 inches tall and 143 pounds. That gives her a body mass index of 25, which is well within normal limits.
And I believe you answered this question earlier from the, talking about Ms. Gunther.
Yes.
There was a discussion made of the entry and exit wound and whether you were able to determine the position she was in, either standing, sitting, kneeling, or are you able to do that from your examination when she was shot in the head?
I cannot do that. I can only describe the path of the projectile through the head, not her position in three-dimensional space.
Yes, sir. Now, from your observation, you indicated it was a medium, potentially a medium caliber bullet.
Yes, sir.
Are you familiar with the different weapons?
Yes, sir.
Is a .45 caliber considered a medium weapon?
Yes, I would say it's medium as well.
Would a 9mm be considered a medium weapon?
Yes, in fact, that's the most standard medium definition I think we would use. Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. Now, as far as the wound in the right hand,
Yes.
without medical, is it true without medical certainty, you're able to tell where the position of the hand was, either in front of her or behind her or facing someone?
Right. I cannot tell you that. I can just tell you that the bullet passes through that web of tissue.
And going back to Ms. Gunther, from the entry wound to the exit wound, and the fact that she was under the influence of cocaine and possibly other drugs, including alcohol, would that have been instantaneously, would she have died instantaneously?
On Miss Gunther, I believe so, yes, given the damage to the midline structures of the brain. Yes, sir.
And dying instantly, she would not suffer any length of pain?
That is correct.
Now, going to Ms. Green,
Yes.
I have a similar question. From your testimony medically about the entry wound and the exit wound, and the fact that she was under the influence of narcotics and alcohol, would she have suffered?
No, sir. Near instant.
Yes, sir. Then that brings me finally to Miss Iwana Patton. She was also under the influence of these narcotics, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Do you have your toxicology report there?
Yes, I do have it. Yes, sir.
What was she under?
She is positive for ethanol at ethanol and hydrocodone.
What happens when you mix hydrocodone and alcohol?
It potentiates the effects of both. That is, the sedative effect of both drugs is magnified when taking them together.
And would that lessen her sensory perception of pain?
Yes.
You described the entry wound as going through potentially the soft tissue through the nose, the nasal area,
Yes, sir.
and then hitting a portion of the cerebral cortex, I presume you said?
The cerebellar cortex, not the cerebral, so we're below that, but the base of the skull, yes.
And that would have,
Cerebellum.
I apologize. Would that have severed her mental state?
She did have a contusion there, so there is a possibility she could have become unconscious relatively quickly. I wouldn't say instant, given the degree of wounding, but certainly that wounding would have incapacitated her relatively quickly, within seconds. I'm not suggesting she's moving around for minutes by any stretch of the imagination.
And would it be correct to say that a projectile travels at a high rate of speed? We're talking about milliseconds, are we not?
Yeah, it could be very quick, yes.
Yes, sir. So we're not talking about a long period of time between the entry wound at the nose and the exit wound.
Oh, yes, that's a very quick time. Yeah, it's fractions of a second. Sorry, I misunderstood, yes. The
And-
time it takes the projectile to get from the nose to the cerebellum is very quick.
Did you take the photographs, or who took the photographs at the medical examiner's office?
So at the medical examiner's office, Dr. Parsons and the autopsy assistant who was helping him would have taken the photographs. At the time, I believe the doctor took the photographs. But I did not take them, no.
Yes, sir. But they're part of your record.
Yes, sir.
Somebody use your photographs. Thank you.
You want me to put it on screen again?
Andrew.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just it's B, it's 30B.
Oh, this is State's Exhibit 30B?
30B.
30B. And you described that entry wound in so many centimeters?
Yes, I believe it was 1 on her. 1 centimeter with the 0.5 centimeter abrasion collar, where it's thickest at the 12 o'clock position. Yes, sir. 1 centimeter.
And were you able to determine the centimeter of the entry wounds in Gunther and in Miss Green?
Yes,
And what were those?
0.8.
So this would be a little bit larger?
Just slightly larger, yes, 2 millimeters.
Now, if that was fired from a distance, a smaller caliber projectile, let's say a 22 millimeter,
Uh-huh.
isn't it correct that with the velocity and distance, that it isn't a direct shot into the nose, that it may be turning slightly?
You are correct. If a 22 hits at an angle of yaw, the side of the projectile hits the nose, then yes, it could create a wound that looked like that, potentially.
So medically speaking, it cannot with medical certainty say that this was fired from a 40 millimeter as an example.
Based strictly on the examination of the external wounding, what you're saying is true.
We're going to go to the next.
30C.
30C.
Yeah, 30C.
We're looking at state's photograph 30C.
Yes?
Now, we have seen the exit wounds on both Miss Gunther and on Miss Green.
Yes?
On an exit wound, wouldn't you have a larger blowout? This can almost be sealed together without, it could be sewn together without much of an interruption.
It's certainly not as impressive of an exit wound as the others. My comment would be this projectile had to pass through a great deal of soft tissue and debris as it passes around the base of the skull. Therefore, I would suggest that the kinetic energy of this projectile was less as it exited than the other two.
And with a high caliber weapon, you would have more velocity pushing that projectile through the head, and wouldn't it give a tendency to come out round as opposed to sideways?
The propensity of a projectile to yaw in the body is partially determined by what you suggest. However, there are many other factors, including what portions of bone and the angles that it impacts those bones. The problem here is we have a whole conglomeration of cartilage and bone that this passes through at the base of the skull. So I'm not sure any expert could testify as to how something ought to yaw based on the very complex wound path this creates.
Yes, sir. And as such, you are not able to determine without any medical certainty that that is a 40 caliber exit as opposed to a 22 caliber exit. Is that correct?
It is my opinion that it would be unlikely that a 22 would have enough kinetic energy to exit at all. Therefore, the presence of an exit indicates higher muzzle velocities than I would expect with a 22 long rifle.
And as far as that answer is concerned, of course, that is your opinion without medical certainty?
That is my opinion based on the hundreds of 22 projectiles I've seen enter the head and the hundreds of 40 caliber projectiles I've seen enter the head.
Is it your testimony that a 22 caliber going through that soft tissue, even though it hit some bony issue, would have remained in her body and not gone all the way through?
That is what I believe, yes, sir.
But having examined your autopsy included an examination interiorly, I presume from your testimony, that that is the only conclusion, that if she was shot with a 22, that the 22 would still be in her body?
Particularly if it hit at a yawed angle, as we suggested to describe the larger entrance wound. When projectiles hit at a yaw, they expose a larger surface area to the skin surface, and they actually lose kinetic energy more quickly. So a 22 that creates the wound in the nose that's larger because it's hitting sideways or tumbling is going to stop inside the body. It should not exit like that, in my opinion.
Okay. No other questions, Your Honor.
Any redirect? Oh, sorry.
I wanted, excuse me, about the effect of alcohol on Ms. Patton.
Sure, yes.
We've already talked about that, so my question is, from your medical opinion,
Yes, sir.
is that she would have died without pain?
Generally speaking, yes. I believe given the wound path and the alcohol and hydrocodone, she would have died without significant pain. Like we said, she's going to be unconscious within seconds. So in that second period, maybe there's some pain, but it's a very small amount of time.
And we could be talking about milliseconds.
Oh, sure. It could be very quick.
Yeah. Thank you, sir.
Any redirect?
Yes, sir. Thank you, Judge. And Dr. Fulcher, just so we're clear, based on your, we're looking at 30C and ABC, you don't rely on just the entrance and exit wounds to make your determination about the caliber of weapon, correct?
That is correct.
You actually look at the injuries inside and what they caused and those sort of injuries, and based on that complete review of all of those injuries, entrance and exit wound, what is your opinion about whether or not a .22 caliber weapon could have done this?
So for a .22 caliber weapon to create the hole in the nose, it would have had to hit at a yaw. I do not believe that a .22 impacting straight in will make that large of a defect. If it does that, it's going to lose so much kinetic energy, I doubt it even makes it to the base of the skull. The other issue with this case being a .22 is that if it impacts and creates that guttered wound I was telling you about, because it's hitting tangentially, it's actually pushing across a large distance of bone. It's a longer distance of bone to go make the graze wound than it is to punch straight through. Therefore, it would lose an immense amount of kinetic energy hitting the cerebellum or the base of the skull, the posterior fossa, underlying the cerebellum, at that point. At that point in time, it should stop. Anything larger, the medium caliber, would have enough kinetic energy to do all this.
And when you say, I know we all love 8th grade science, kinetic energy.
Sure, sorry.
But are you talking like the friction, like it has a certain amount of energy and it's rubbing against friction-wise against something and it's slowing itself down? So
Kinetic energy is the energy stored in an object in motion. When an object's in motion, it has kinetic energy. And as a projectile enters a body, it is designed to wound that body via the loss of kinetic energy. Therefore, the more kinetic energy, the more wounding. If you compare something like a 30-06 round, it has over 3,000 joules of kinetic energy, whereas a .22 has like 150. And the .40 caliber has like 800 to 700-ish, depending on the load. So that's why we can be so definitive between .22, medium, and high-power rifle. If you were asking me to distinguish between a 9mm and a .40, we wouldn't be having this conversation. They're too close.
When you talked earlier about the .8, and then the 1 centimeter, though all of those are consistent and could be consistent with a .40 caliber ammunition entrance wound, correct?
Yes, depending on the angle you enter at, you can make a slightly bigger hole. So skin is not a perfect matrix or substance for impression and pattern recognition. You can make broad assumptions, 12-gauge shotgun versus .22, but as far as like 9mm versus .40, I would never make that determination for you.
Thank you. May I have just a moment, Judge? Thank you, sir. Nothing further.
Any additional questions, Mr. Shea?
Let me just check one moment, Your Honor. No, Your Honor.
All right, you ready to be excused, Nate?
Yes, sir. Thank you, Judge.
We have some medium for our case, so there's a possibility I may call him.
All right, you're still subject to the subpoena, just keep in touch with the lawyer.
He's also going to be recalled later, so if you guys can think what you might need for your case, maybe on the second time here for him. Okay.
Okay, you're still subject to subpoena, all right?
Yes, sir.
It'd probably be good for us to take a 15-minute break, so we'll take a 15-minute break. We'll resume at 3:15. Let them go outside too if they want to smoke a cigarette. Smoking is not good for you.
Don't forget with us.
Yeah. Thank you. 15 minutes.
Thanks, Jim.
Yeah, you know where it's at. My bad. Forgot.
Yeah, I'm not too delicate.
No, you're good.
Ladies and gentlemen. Ooh, it's cold in here.
I know.